Well, howdy. If you happen to be a fan of 1980s cop shows, you may recognize this, or you may not. What you're looking at is Detonics Pocket 9. Now, what is Detonics? It's a name you don't run into much anymore. This one I got in box. That's the box. And it even had the manual, which is kind of rare these days. And it has 4 magazines, which are just as rare as this pistol. Anyway, Detonics was started in 1976 by a fellow by the name of Pat Yates, I think. Well, he got a couple of partners. He had been working for a company up in Bellevue, Washington, making basically TNT, explosives. Why? Well, the company was a subcontractor to, of all people, NASA, and they were making the solid fuel propellant they used in rockets, also the military. So Yates was very familiar. He was a machinist, and he was very familiar with high-tech, modern materials, but he was also a shooter. And he looked around at the shooting community and said, you know, one thing that they don't have is a good quality compact 45 ACP. This is in the 1970s, mind you. And so he built one. Well, his was called the Combat Master, the 45 Combat Master. And basically it was like a regular 45, except that it was chopped off in the rear. It didn't have the grip safety. It didn't have the gizmo up here. Instead, it used a cone-shaped barrel to make the connection. And it was a really interesting gun. I had one. I sold it. But he also made, in 1 year only, in 1984, he made this. And as I was saying, if you were a fan of 1980s cop shows, there was one called Miami Vice. And in a couple of episodes, one of the characters on it, I think he went by Sonny Crockett on the thing, he had a Bren 10 as his main gun. The Bren 10 is basically the first major 10mm pistol, and it was basically a CZ75 chambered in 10mm. The Bren 10 has another story, but he had this as his backup gun. He had it in an ankle holster. Now, the one he had looked slightly different from this one in that it had a pointy crook on here on the trigger guard. This one does not. This is an earlier model. This is early 1984. His was late 1984. This is a 9mm that works exactly like a Walther PPK, except for 2 major differences. One is instead of having a trigger guard that folds out to do the takedown, it has these 2 buttons here. And the second reason is why you don't take it off, except in emergencies. And that's that it uses 2 recoil springs and is very, very hard to recoil, to manually work. I'm going to put a magazine in, if I can get, do it backwards here. There. As you can see, it's got this collet thing that holds the magazines, or I mean the recoil spring, which is around the barrel here and is now compressed in this area here. And when it goes home, you'll hear exactly how stout that is. You can see it has this really strange sighting system of just this long groove here and a front post. But it works okay. The whole thing is made of stainless steel, and it's single and double action. The double action is kind of long and hard, and if you don't hold your finger right, it can bite you easily. And also, this thing can come back and bite you in the web of the hand if you're not careful. I've had this for years, and it's one of my favorite play toys. I bought it around 1986, I think, in a gun store in Albuquerque from a friend who ran it. And it was not at the time, it was not that cheap a gun. But it was cheaper than it would have been had I bought it brand new. He sold it used. I mean, I have nothing against buying a used gun. Used guns are actually a very worthwhile and good value for money, because unlike cars, these have no built-in obsolescence. And this thing can probably be shot for another 20, 30,000 rounds before it needs any kind of maintenance at all. This thing is basically maintenance-free, though I do clean it regularly, even though I haven't shot it in years. I have heard that these are a little bit of a issue in that respect because Yates was not that great a machinist, from what I've read. And these can, well, at least the Combat Masters, the early ones, can crack because they're made out of taking basically two 45 1911s, cutting them into pieces and then welding them back together and then polishing it down. At least that's what I've read. Later on, they did investment casting. The company itself was around in, well, it was Detonics, then it was New Detonics, then Detonics USA. It was around until about 2007, I think. Now the name is being held by a company, I think, in the Czech Republic. Is that what the code CZ means? I think that's Czech Republic. Anyway, just an interesting gun from the 80s.